Hi, Tom Anderson, day 52 of 100 Days of Thankfulness. Today I'm talking about the importance of protecting the helpless, as well as why I'm so thankful for Lydia Sipes. So yesterday I was talking about the importance of sacrifice, and I just want to clarify when I talk about that, it's not like I'm saying all sacrifice is good. Really the only time sacrifice even has that element of good is when, to quote Spock from Star Trek, when the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Perfect example of that is Jesus Christ, his sacrifice for all of us. I gave a simple little example with the plane is going to crash. We have 5 people and 4 parachutes. Obviously, it's a bad situation to begin with. And it's a situation that requires someone to make a sacrifice. And so it's important that that sacrifice be a personal decision that someone has made for themselves. It's not like we should ever say, I think you should be sacrificed. And it's very easy for people to sacrifice the helpless. And this happens all the time. And what's most unfortunate about it is often these sacrifices happen of the helpless, and they're very unnecessary. An example of that might be when you're watching the news and you hear about, someone left their kid in their car seat sleeping, and it was a hot day, and the kid died. We watch that and we just mourn, not only for just the tragic loss, but just even, we feel bad for, some of us are really angry, how could the parent be so neglectful? But, when I hear about that, I think, gosh, there have been times where I'd be like driving somewhere on a weekend, and I would just mindlessly start driving to work, and, I could see myself doing mindless things like that. I hope I would never be so mindless as to be so neglectful to leave my child in the car, but I can see how that happens, and actually I'm sort of surprised that it doesn't happen more often. The statistics are on average about 38 kids per year die from that. So that's that's not to say that's oh, it's only 38. It is a tragedy. Every single one is a tragedy. But when we look at the big picture, there's so much more deaths that are occurring that are needless deaths. I'm going to do something that's a little weird. I'm going to actually put up the top 10 death statistics. I'm going to put it up here on the tree. I'm looking at the tree as if I can see it, but I really can't. So you can see number 1 is heart disease, and number 2 is cancer. Now, these statistics are U.S. based, so I'm just going to switch these statistics now to be world based. And these statistics are very similar. You see on these top 10, we lost Alzheimer's and suicide have dropped off the top 10 list. And now 2 more have come in. AIDS is on the list, and diarrheal diseases is on the list. But you see the top is very similar. Stroke moved up, so at the top is still heart disease at 7.4 million deaths per year. Stroke is at 6.7 million. When we look at this, both the U.S.-based list and the world-based list have 8 in the list that are preventable. And they're preventable, and I talked about this during my first week about through nutrition and exercise and just our daily life choices, we can actually prevent all these chronic diseases. Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That is so true with all of these death statistics. So these are needless deaths. Now, the reality is, even if we all had perfect nutrition, eventually we're going to die. That's going to push, kind of the point where we die. And what we die from might be something very different, or it might still be something the same. But the point is, we would not only live longer lives, but we would also have more productive lives. You look at just, when we think about our children and how often we just, think, oh, good job, let's go to Dairy Queen and celebrate. And we don't think about, the damage that we're actually doing by teaching our kids just kind of the wrong thing. And the fact that we often go out into grocery stores and buy processed foods that don't have any nutritional value. And we not only are we kind of stunting both the mental and physical growth of our children, but we're teaching them to do the same thing with their children when they get older. It becomes habitual and addictive, and we can blame the companies for, well, they're the ones that made their products so addictive. And yes, they did. They made some decisions that were based on money, but really we're the ones buying it. So if we were to say, you know what, I want another alternative that tastes just as good, is just as convenient, is in the same price range. You look at Yavo, I talked about, that cost per meal is between $2.50 and $4.50 a meal, which is cheaper than Dairy Queen, yet we still regularly go out to fast food, bring our kids there, and we don't even think about it. So I'm kind of getting a little off topic there, but my point is these are preventable deaths, and we should we have it within ourselves to be able to do something about it. And if we start saying, nutrition is important to me, I want to put my money, just divert the same thing that I'm spending towards more nutritious products, then, the companies will catch on as well. And, as they're starting to lose money, they'll realize, oh, people are starting to be more focused on nutrition. Let's get on board with that. So, and Yavo is doing a great job. I just hope that more and more companies do the same thing. So there's something else that's missing from this list that I'm going to bring up again. Now, up on number 1, 7.4 million, you might be surprised to learn there's actually one that's not on this list, and it's 7.6 million deaths per year. I'm going to bring that up. So, starvation. Now, it's not real common in the U.S. I think, through neglect, there might be maybe 100 cases in the U.S. of children dying, each year. So this is definitely a worldwide statistic. The reason it's so rare in America is because we are a very wealthy nation. There's this article, I've got my computer here, I'm going to bring that up. And it's this concept of if the world of 7.1 billion people were actually a village of just 100, what would that look like? And what it says is, of those 100 people, 83 would be able to read and write, 17 would not. 7 would have a college degree. 22 would own or share a computer. 77 people would have a place to shelter them from the wind and rain, but 23 would not. 1 would be dying of starvation, that's up there. 15 would be undernourished. 21 would be overweight. 87 would have access to safe drinking water, and 13 people would have no clean, safe water to drink. So, if that number 1 is just the people that are dying of starvation, the other part of that statistic that they said 15 are malnourished, there's actually, what's the number here? It is 795 million people do not have enough food to lead a healthy, active life. So, that's tragic. That's the other thing I like about Yavo is they have this 43 for Kids program where they're actually buying food for people that can't afford it. And it's the best food they could get. Of the 7.6 million, by the way, on that top statistic in the world, 45% of them are children under 5. So again, to protect the helpless, these are kids that are starving to death, that are incapable of, they're not old enough to go out and fend for themselves to get the food, so they're dying of starvation. So we need to protect them. Now, it might surprise you, but there's something that happened, 2,300, to 2,600 years ago, in ancient Babylon, which at that time was the largest and most powerful city in the world. This is going to get a little bit weird, so just bear with me. Now, at that time, it was the largest city in the world with a population in excess of 200,000 people. Every year, they celebrated what's called Ishtar's Sunday, with fertility symbols of rabbits and eggs. I know that's starting to sound familiar. During this time, they conducted a gruesome pagan ritual that included killing multiple 3-month-old babies. Dipping eggs in the blood and selling these eggs with the promise that eating the eggs would increase fertility. The pagan temple was filled with women who were required to have sex with any man that entered. Any babies conceived during this ritual would later be sacrificed in the same ritual the following year. Okay, so why am I talking about something that happened 2,300 to 2,600 years ago? Obviously, we're not killing 3-month-old babies today. And we're not filling temples with women that are required to have sex. Here's what is going on today, and this is why I bring it up. As difficult as it may be for many of my Christian friends to accept, this pagan ritual is the actual origin of the word Easter. Certainly not as we understand it when we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, but the symbols of rabbits and painted eggs are still present today. Like Babylon of its time, we now live in the most powerful and most wealthy nation in the world. Although we don't sacrifice 3-month-old babies or have ritualistic sex in temples, there are 1.5 million victims of sex trafficking in the U.S. today, and at least 20.9 million adults and children are bought and sold worldwide into commercial sexual servitude, forced labor, and bonded labor. And then there's this statistic on abortion. So when you look at that number, it kind of puts everything else into perspective. So while many of us celebrate a woman's right to choose between keeping a baby, putting the baby up for adoption, or choosing abortion, so many of us are unaware of just how big this number is and how it makes all of these other causes of death seem almost insignificant by comparison. When abortion is the choice, what choice does the baby get? And how exactly is this pro-choice when the baby when the baby loses an entire lifetime of choices? And this is the reason that I'm so thankful for Lydia Sipes. So she's doing something, I'm going to bring up the website on that. And by the way, I'll provide links for all of this because I know this is a lot of information and this is a long video, but this, I hope you can see that this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And it's always been, even before I was a Christian, I was very much a pro-life person, even when I didn't know, is there a God? But it made sense to me that, babies, they should have a right to live. So Lydia is part of a ministry called ICU Mobile, and I'll provide a link for it, but they have the following mission, which is to go serve women, go save lives, and go share Jesus. Now the values are it's a Christian foundation, so they live and promote Christian principles and ideals, sharing the gospel according to the Bible. Life, we believe in the sanctity of human life from the point of conception until natural death. Dignity, we care for women holistically, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. compassion. We are non-judgmental, non-political, and non-coercive. And integrity. We strive for consistent commitment to actions, methods, measures, principles, and outcomes which honor moral, ethical, and spiritual values and principles. So what they're actually doing with these mobile units is they're just going out and talking to women that are considering abortion, and they're giving them a free ultrasound just to help them make that decision. I don't want to get too political over the pro-life, pro-choice debate. Obviously, I think I've made it clear where I stand on that. But I would like to share something that might come as another shock to you, besides the whole Easter shock. So Karen had an abortion. Now, of the statistics, 5% of abortions, less than 5% of the abortions that occur are due to rape, incest, or the pregnancy was going to, it could kill the mother. And that was the situation with Karen. She was actually helping out. I talked about how Cindy and Jared Rasmussen had surrogate carriers. Karen was one of those surrogate carriers several years ago, and she did get pregnant with their baby, and it was an ectopic pregnancy, which means the baby was implanted in the fallopian tube. So obviously, in this kind of a situation, I don't know any pro-life person. Personally, I don't know any pro-life person that is insane enough to say, that's crazy that they aborted the baby. Obviously, if you don't abort the baby in that situation, the baby's going to die anyways, and the mom's probably going to die too. So, when I actually arrived late to the hospital on the scene when this was all taking place, and by the time I got there, the doctor told me what had happened. The abortion had already happened at that point. And I'm glad it did. It would have been silly for him to hold off before we made some big decision about this, because obviously the right thing to do in that situation is to abort the baby. I get that. And everyone that's pro-life gets that too. So it's silly. It's kind of a silly argument from people that are so pro-choice to think that pro-lifers are out here thinking, under no circumstance should you abort the baby. Obviously, if it's going to threaten the health of the mother, that's the right decision to make, is to abort the child, especially when the child doesn't have a chance either. So the other aspect to this is and I'm speaking to anyone that might be watching this video and might be considering getting an abortion. It's good to actually read the statistics about people that have had abortions and kind of, what their thoughts were after. So here's a statistic, or several statistics. Dr. Ann Speckard in a 1985 University of Minnesota study researched long-term manifestations of abortion. It was 5 to 10 years after these mothers had aborted their child, and found that 81% of mothers reported preoccupation with their aborted child. 54%, that's more than half, had nightmares. 35% had perceived visitations with their child, and 96% felt their abortion had taken a human life. Immediately after an abortion, many women report a feeling of relief, but guilt and depression frequently follow. A national poll found that at least 56% of women experience a sense of guilt over their decision. Though the pollster himself acknowledged that many women will not even admit having had an abortion. In fact, a 5-year study shows that 25% of women who have had abortions sought out psychiatric care versus just 3% of women who have not had abortions. Further, numerous studies reveal that women who have had an abortion experience a high incidence of depression, stress, low self-esteem, suicidal feelings, and substance abuse. So, I hope I've made my point. I realize this is by far the longest video I've ever made. I promise, this is probably going to be the deepest I ever go, or the most extreme I ever go with any of my days of thankfulness. But this, this is kind of that one thing that just weighs so heavily on my soul, that I felt I needed to get it out on one of these days, and I'm kind of at that midpoint anyways. So I hope you can understand where I'm coming from with all of this. And thanks again to Lydia.